we can start, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. Next up, we're gonna have Florian Siekmann, and well, I'm not gonna generalize. I'm gonna spell those things for you, but I think the title of his talk is "Agree to Disagree: Striving for Consensus in Regional Energy Transitions in Germany." That's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here and have the opportunity to present our latest research there. And yeah, I already heard the title of this presentation, and it's mainly based on work conducted together with Sandra Benghaus, who's also in the audience today. And yeah, we are based in Germany, in the western part, in Jülich, which is a city next to Cologne and Aachen. And yeah, Sandra is also a professor at the RWTH Aachen University in Germany. And I would like to start this presentation by introducing you to the context our research is embedded in, and yeah, illustrate our approach of addressing a regional transformation process, which is happening right in front of our doorstep. And the region we are concerned with is the Rheinische Revier, and which is also situated between Düsseldorf, Cologne, and Aachen. And the region is Europe's largest connected lignite mining area. And thereby, throughout the several decades, the region grew and is basically shaped by this mining industry and this lignite mining. But following the decision of the German government to phase out coal, or the energy produced by coal mining, it's now strongly affected by two transforming trends, like the phase out of coal, but at the same time, the plan is to implement a sustainable bioeconomy. But the question is, how do we do that? Here, the SDGs can provide some guidance as a global framework, as orientation for research and policy. But the thing is, there's a necessity to bridge this global set of SDGs towards something you can actually implement in a regional context. And yeah, what we are trying to do is to help providing information to make to close this gap. And what makes the region we are working with specifically interesting is also that we have a lot of actors involved there. And we know from previous history regarding the energy transition in Germany that like the stakeholder discourses and these power constellations have a severe influence of the actual decision-making process afterwards. So if you want to make this transition process successful, you cannot really ignore these perceptions. But the problem is you are dealing with the wicked problem. And the wicked problem is defined by certain key properties. And that starts with it actually already difficult to formulate a specific goal. And usually that's kind of a starting point when you want to find a solution for a given policy problem. And also solutions for wicked problems are rather good or bad instead of true or false. And another aspect is here that you cannot really test the solution to a wicked problem. And wicked problem is essentially unique. So every transformation process has its own characteristics and specificities. And that basically leads to the fact that we don't really have an optimal solution, but we are basically striving to find the best solution possible. And since every wicked problem is essentially unique, your perception of the problem strongly influences what you consider as the correct way to address that. And so how do we address that, or how do we find a way to address that and agree on that? In other words, what kind of consensus are we actually looking for? And one way to refer to this is by referring to Rawls' overlapping consensus. And an overlapping consensus here is a general agreement on fundamental principles, and those can be based on religious belief or ethical or moral beliefs or similar. So we can still have different reasons to agree on something or disagree on something, but those should be based in these fundamental principles we are convinced of. Another way of looking at this is by referring to Amartya Sen's plural grounding concept. And here we are trying to agree on a specific issue rather than a unified set of theoretical principles. And achieving consensus through plural grounding basically means that we engage in public reasoning, and we try to use this process to find a common ground. Even though we can have completely different fundamental beliefs, if you manage to find a consensus on this specific issue, that can already be enough to find a consensus there. So both concepts here seek to find a common ground, but also among diverse perspectives, but one is a bit more narrow, whereas the other is a bit broader, more inclusive. So the consensus we are striving for, and given the background of the wicked problem and a complex transition process, refers more to a consensus based on plural grounding. Yeah, and beyond understanding the challenges, it's also very important that we try to integrate them somehow into a decision-making process. And here, a multi-criteria decision aid can illustrate a really useful tool, because as a structured framework here, we are able to consider multiple factors, and we can support a decision-making process in such a complex decision environment. And in our case, we can actually use that to align the stakeholder perceptions on the one hand, and the decision alternatives on the other hand. And this flexibility to integrate stakeholder perceptions and interests, really makes it a suitable tool for addressing these problems. And we started to categorize that into 4 main points, which is defining the problem, which consisted of defining the overall decision problem generally and identify the relevant social actors. And second, we structured the problem by identifying the decision criteria we need and the development of the decision alternatives. And third, we evaluated the decision alternatives and criteria by integrating the subjective stakeholder perceptions and use that to complete our decision matrix. And lastly, we wanted to rank the alternatives from best to worst. So we're basically talking about a ranking problem, and then provide information for stakeholders and decision makers. And one of our first steps here was to conduct a focus group workshops where we invited several stakeholders along the region, and those included farmers. We had a representative from the church, from industry, from the regional government, and so on. And here we asked questions like, what does the transformation towards a sustainable bioeconomy mean for you? What would be, from your perspective, decisive in terms of success or failure? And here we noticed that for most stakeholders in our group, especially the fair share of financial burdens were at the center of their concerns, but also ecological aspects. And then we continued as one of the next steps. We investigated existing perceptions in the scientific literature that addresses what stakeholders actually understand when they think of the bioeconomy. And here we noticed that we have a strong focus on stakeholders from policy and industry. And the prevailing understanding here was generally that they thought of the bioeconomy as a sort of bioresource substitution vision, or like a biotechnology development vision. In contrast, actors from civil society and NGOs and similar civil groups have fairly been investigated, and we found a notable underrepresentation of ecological and social concerns. And maybe one more here. That actually illustrates a problem, because when we have to communicate the bioeconomy as a sustainability concept, but most stakeholders who actively shape this transformation process understand that more as a theme for bioresource substitution or for biotechnology development, that can lead to a clash with the expectation of the wider population. And we continue to structure the decision problems, and here we develop narratives guided by the development process of the shared socioeconomic pathways. And the idea was to make the narratives consistent with these pathways, because it's easier, first of all, it's easier for researchers to relate to them, because they're already established in the scientific community. And so when you see one of the regional transformation pathways and they are related to the global pathways, you already know what's the core, even though you might not know the specific characteristics, but you have already an idea what this pathway might be determined by in its core. And at the same time, the process we try to develop here can be used in other contexts, and hopefully also inform further applications in a different regional context, for instance. So to do that, we first determined main characteristics of the existing narratives, assessed whether they are actually like relevant challenges related to the bioeconomy transition, also to the regional context we have here at the stakeholders. And then we merged that into narratives that consider these regional characteristics. And to develop the indicator framework for the evaluation later on, we used a systematic multi-layer filter approach. And the first requirement for an indicator to be included in our indicator set was that the indicator is part of the global set of SDGs. And the second requirement was that it's related to the bioeconomy. The next condition here is that it was included in the German sustainability, in the national sustainability strategy. And yeah, lastly, that it's relevant for the region we are working with. The region in our case is landlocked, or so indicators related to marine protection or coastal protection or something would not really be useful in this context. And yeah, overall, if an indicator would fulfill these requirements, it would be included in the entire framework. And especially when you have layer 3 and 4, that is where you can basically tailor this to the regional decision-making context you're actually working with. And yeah, using these narratives and the indicator framework, we were able to quantify 5 regional transformation pathways that are suited to the regional context based on the SDGs and associated to the requirements for a sustainable bioeconomy. And the data we used to quantify the indicators were is basically publicly available as within the SDG data set. There's a website from the German statistical Bundesamt für Statistik, the Statistic Bureau, and they basically publish data on these indicators. To integrate the stakeholder perspectives, we used a survey and calculated weights using the Falvey analytical hierarchy process. And in our case, an interesting observation was that the citizens considered the ecology dimension as most important, whereas stakeholders from the government had a greater tendency to value technological aspects. And yeah, while this is not representative, that pretty much corresponds with our observations from the focus group workshop and our literature-based analysis. And in the next step, we use the promising method to rank the alternatives. And here we were able to develop stakeholder profiles for each stakeholder group individually, and later on also group evaluation. And the method we used here also allows us to illustrate incomparabilities, which I will introduce on the next slide. But what you can see on this slide is that we can order the regional transformation pathways from best to worst according to their net flows, which is basically the difference between positive and negative attributes of the alternative in question. And that's here illustrated in blue is the net flow. The red is the positive aspect. The red is the negative aspect, and the green bar illustrates the positive aspects of the alternative. And yeah, here we can see that the results for the stakeholder group, social initiatives and NGOs, where RTP5 is preferred over RTP2, and RTP4 is preferred over RTP3. In contrast, on this slide, we can see that focusing on the group industry and commerce, that RTP2 is preferred over RTP5 and RTP3 over 4. And beyond that, we can see that the negative flows of RTP3, the red bar, is larger than the one of RTP4, even though the net flow is better. And that by definition, the method we used here illustrates the incomparability. So for this stakeholder group, for instance, we could communicate that these two alternatives are not, it's not really possible to compare these alternatives based on the inputs you submitted via the weights. And but overall, when you see this graphic, it's quite obvious that RTP3 and 4 should be avoided altogether because all of the others are notably better. And here we can see the evaluation of all stakeholders, and we can see that only 3 groups consider RTP5 better as RTP2. And at the same time, we can see that RTP1 is considered the best alternative. And RTP3 and 4 is generally worse. And that really helps to provide information in the form of a joint group evaluation, but also complemented by the individual stakeholder profiles. And information is desperately needed when you against the background also of the knowledge dilemma, because the transformation to a sustainable bioeconomy will definitely rely on new technologies, and how these will impact sustainability indicators is absolutely unclear for the moment. So it's really important to monitor these changes and have the monitor systems also up to date. Because when you try to assess the social consequence of a technology early, you usually have a lack of information. If you try to do that at a later point, it might be more difficult to adjust maldevelopments, for instance. So everything helping to avoid undesired pathways can be considered beneficial in this context. So that brings us to policy implications. And here we have really a risk of disappointment when the expectations of the involved stakeholders are significantly different to the actual impacts of how the bioeconomic transformation will then proceed. And if there's a huge difference there, there's a risk of a potential backlash. And I guess also if you know this problem with not in my backyard or similar developments, these things can really at least slow down, or if not even block the intended transformation process. So ignoring these perceptions and interests is not really wise. And one way to address that is to include more stakeholders beyond technology development. And the ranking we provide here can illustrate potential courses of action, but it is intended as a starting point. So we're not prescribing what to do or what not to do. It's intended to provide useful information to inform the decision-making process, and hopefully arrive at a consensus based on dual grounding. That brings us to the way forward. And overall, there's definitely a vast potential to transform the region successfully, but out-of-the-box approaches will probably not yield the results we are actually hoping for. So we need flexible approaches. And since we are in an environment where we don't have an optimal solution, every approach that can provide useful information to inform the decision-making process and help to avoid bad decisions and hopefully contribute towards good decisions can be really help this connection. So once again, it's intended to inform, not to prescribe. Here selected some references I used for this presentation, and that I'm at the end. Thank you for your attention, and so thank you for the organizing team to make this event possible. And I'm looking forward for an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Very good session. So when you were choosing the cycles that you engage in this process, how do you go about choosing how many cycles of each group were involved? Was it new by community or community, or was the enunciation?
So for the focus group workshop, we invited like one or two per stakeholder group. And for the other events, so there were several workshops going on, where we also visited and wanted to observe who's actually involved in the policy making process there. And basically, we were dependent on who is actually actively involved in this process, because it was not our idea to make it representative in this case, but to observe what is actually happening and what can we learn for other processes, and what is actually going on in the region we are working on. We also conducted a representative survey among the population at some point, but that for this case, that's not really helpful, because when you think about, I don't know, making where to store nuclear waste, for instance, if you make that, if you ask people in Boston if there should be a storage facility in Boston, or if you ask that nationwide, I'm pretty sure the result will differ.
Consider you have the same way towards humanity, or do you consider that the way which we have energy consumption has way for consumption or commerce? Was that again all the other costs are the same, or you get it like different way for everything?
For the group evaluation, we consider it all equally important, because I don't know, like from our perspective, it's not really on us to decide which stakeholder group is more or less important. And also from a theoretical perspective, when we want to arrive at a dual grounding consensus, it would not be, it would be inconsistent then to disregard other perspectives. So we want to make that balance. Of course, if you do that in a workshop format, for instance, you're able to adjust that. It can see how results would change.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. We have a lot of questions that I asked before because of the lot of the field that I was making. There are also aspects of important this topic to you involved in these kind of workshops, questions. Just yeah, to kind of weight the answers based on how important they seem to the people asked.
So how we calculate or how we use the survey to get the weights for what's the question?
No, basically, just is there any ways through the basis working with people thinking it's for them? Like, for example, if you ask a question, you ask what this is not for you, because maybe some people answer the questions, but they don't really care, whereas for others, really has to be very good.
We cannot really test the motivation of the people who gave the answers to us in that sense, but of course, we included the weights we gathered via these surveys, and those weights definitely have an effect on the ranking then, yes.
How much power do you have in
That's a very good question. I'm afraid, yes.
Is interesting one. It's like a living rabbit hole because it's actually ongoing, and what we see that there is actually a really strong collaboration between the federal ministry of the federal state and the big research institutions. Such a one time novel thing going on, and they're actually seeking the collaboration. So it's actually one of the cases where we're in close dialogue with the actual decision makers. That is the case in most of the cases. So this is really bad to be a dialogue. But what we also see is that, of course, in the end, we give the advice to the ministry, but then the actual funding decisions of projects and decision making is obviously still done by the policymakers. But I think it's really a great situation where we're actually in very close dialogue and see the interest from both sides to collaborate. So it's a fun research approach. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I put this